Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the L.A. Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Wednesday. We've got a lot on the program today. In our first hour, in just a moment, Congressman Mark Pocan will be taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. If you'd like to get in line to speak with Congressman Pocan, 202-808-9925 is the number. At the top of the second hour, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. Has the time come for at least a discussion of the nationalization of oil and gas? Also, is most of America's inflation about monopolies, price gouging, or oil barons fleecing us? In our third hour, Greg Palast is going to drop by, but Brian Kemp is hiding from you. And the barbaric consequences of the GOP abortion ban are now exposed in a new Senate report. It's truly shocking. So we'll get to all those things in today's program, but let's start with Congressman Mark Pocan, former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, now a member in good standing of same. He's on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the U.S. House. He represents Wisconsin's 2nd District in the House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman Pocan, welcome back. What's at the top of your agenda for today?
Pretty much one thing, November 8th, I got to admit, we're down to less than a week. Lots to do. It's all about getting out the vote. People generally agree with us on the issues. We have some headwinds with some of the myths, I think, about that you're going to be talking about later on your program today about global inflation and the realities of what that really is. We've got some tailwinds with what the Supreme Court did, and it's really across the country now. We're just trying to do everything we can to make sure voters get out and are heard. And if that happens, I think we'll be in much better shape than clearly if people aren't motivated enough to get out. That's the singular priority right now.
One of the things that has been pointed out recently in a couple of op-eds actually is that there are 5 or 6 polling companies that do polling for, 2 of them do a lot of polling for Fox in particular, that are either Republican aligned, I mean literally associated with the Republican Party, or they use methodology that always overweights the Republican vote. And that those 5 or 6 polling companies' results have been incorporated into the 538 numbers, the Nate Silver numbers that everybody loves to quote. And they're skewing the polls toward Republicans in ways that the nonpartisan polls, like the New York Times Siena poll, which shows that Democrats are ahead and probably going to easily hold the Senate. A, they're kind of swamping them, but B, they're fueling this narrative that there's going to be this Republican red wave, and then and a number of states where the legislatures are under Republican control, like Pennsylvania, don't even allow the early ballots or the mail-in ballots to be counted until the day after the election. And so on election day, you're going to see Republicans showing up for, same-day voting because they don't trust mail-in voting. And so it's going to look like Republicans are ahead in those states, and then the next day it's going to flip to Democrats, which is just going to, and on top of these bizarre, slanted polls, is going to just trigger off a whole brand new January 6th kind of Republican freakout. I'm curious your thoughts. I realize there's a lot of stuff in that question, but I'm curious your thoughts about all that.
Well, first of all, one observation is liars are always going to lie, right? So no matter what happens, if people don't like the results, they're going to blame whether votes are counted later. In Wisconsin, traditionally, some of the way the votes are counted in Milwaukee, they take longer than the rest of the state. And then that's a lot of the Democratic votes, as you'd expect in a big city like Milwaukee. And then people, point to that. We're just fully expecting all the misinformation and the lies and everything that the MAGA extremists are going to say. So I'm past that. I'm assuming it's going to happen. We'll be ready to talk about the truth, whether or not some of those folks listen. To me, the most important thing is I don't care much of what the polls say. In Wisconsin, we're a purple state. All the polls have been within the margin of error in both our U.S. Senate race and our governor's race, two of the most important races we have. I'm just telling everyone, if you care, don't just get out and vote, but get out and volunteer in the remaining days to knock on people's doors, to make phone calls, to text people, to make sure that they vote. In some places they can vote early, some places they can't. But everything is about get out the vote. At the end of the day, we know people agree with Democrats on the vast majority of issues, from the climate to Social Security to go up and down the list. We just need to make sure they vote, because if they don't, it's the same as a vote against us. And that really has to be the singular focus. So I'm disregarding many polls right now. I'm disregarding what's going to be said after the election. My only focus is on getting people out knocking on the doors, getting people to the polls to vote. That is the one thing that we all have control over in our individual jurisdictions where we live. And if we do that, we will be successful.
Sounds like a plan. All right, let's pick up some phone calls, all right?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, Jeff in Tampa, Florida. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Representative Pocan. This is Jim Greger. I've got two important things real quick, but the first one is the Democrats aren't giving out the message that Tom keeps saying. Inflation is not our fault. We're lower than Europe, and gas prices are because of gouging. Bernie Sanders is the only one mentioning that. But anyway, I got a thing from the NALC. They're offering a high option Aetna Medicare Advantage program to National Association of Letter Carriers people now. What is the deal? I thought we were going to try to shut that thing down, and they're going to try to move FEHB people there. And I thought FEH people, they said, once you leave Medicare, you leave FEHB and you can't come back. And now they're saying, oh, no, if you don't like it, you can come back. You just have to notify them. This is baloney. And I'll go ahead and let you answer, Mark. But the one thing is about Tom. Tom's message has to get through. Inflation is better over here, 8% than Europe, over 10%. Gas prices are because of the oil companies, 177% profits.
Yep. So the only difference I would say is I hear lots of people saying that. Whether or not the mainstream media picks that up right now, they don't in these final days. They pick up, quite honestly, mostly pablum, so don't be looking to them for what's being said. But I can tell you, I've attended many of the rallies with candidates from all levels, from local to federal office, and you are hearing people. We always say global inflation. Obviously, it's not something Joe Biden or the Democrats created. We talk about where most of that money is going to is corporate profits as opposed to increased goods or increased pay. That's a much smaller portion of it. And on gas, some of us have been saying, so again, I guess what my point is I know a lot of people making this message on gas. Some of us have been saying since a year ago, March, when Texas, they didn't have a proper energy grid up and the processing went down. They've kept prices artificially high, and we've done hearings on that. So I guess what I don't want said is it's not getting out there, because I hear it almost several times a day at the rallies and the events I go to. Whether or not it's getting covered, maybe that's our ultimate problem. But the problem is we are also hearing at doors. And Tom, this is something I heard a lot last weekend. People are nervous about things like the stock market, even though most people aren't really impacted, because the stock market is something that goes up and down, and it's part of it is a long game. But people are looking at that aspect of the economy and some other things. What I wish, and I'm going to go a little long on this one, Tom, is we talked about Social Security more. I think that is one deficit Democrats haven't done as well. When Barack Obama was in Milwaukee on Saturday, he did a great job explaining how everyone is affected when the Republicans want to go after that. The Republican Study Committee, one of the largest groups of Republicans in Washington, want to put it on the chopping block every 5 years. My senator, Ron Johnson, wants to put it on the chopping block every year. That's people's money that we hold for them that comes out of your paycheck on a regular basis, that issue is one I think that we have been somewhat remiss. But on everything else, honestly, I've heard a lot of it.
Yeah, there you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Amy in Madison, Wisconsin. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Oh, hi, Mark and Tom. My question is this. Are the 18 to 29-year-olds secretly voting and not being polled? Because I heard this guy from Harvard. I don't remember when I heard it, but they said that they've never seen a generation so really enthused. And then in like Arizona, they're worried about their families that are not, citizens yet and all that. Is that really happening? Thank you.
I'm not sure, Amy. Thanks for calling from the district. I'm not sure if I got what really happening.
Oh, her question was, are the polling companies actually able to get opinions from 18 to 30-year-olds, 18 to 29-year-olds? So many of these people just don't even answer their phones, ever.
Right.
How do you poll them?
Yeah, and that's why, right now, I would not focus on polling at all. The only thing I would focus on is we are in a final sprint. And if you care about who gets elected, you should volunteer to knock on doors or make phone calls or do some texting between now and Tuesday, because that's the single best thing you can do. Because when people vote, we win, period. We know that based on presidential level turnouts in places like Wisconsin. Generally, the turnout's a little depressed in a midterm. That's why turnout's so important. So I couldn't tell you exactly, other than yes, it is harder to reach some people. Now they're doing a lot of online polls, and I know that has a bigger margin of error than some other types of polling. Don't worry about any polls right now. Worry about committing to some hours of volunteering, and you'll be doing the very best thing you can do to help.
James in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, Tom. Representative Pocan. You read my mind because I was getting ready to hit you, brother. You mentioned now earlier, the caller mentioned that you all aren't speaking to certain issues, and my issue is what you mentioned, which is Social Security. Why aren't the Democrats? Now, you said that they are mentioning this, and you're hearing this in town halls, but the media is not bringing up certain issues. Well, my question to you is, you have a week to go, and you politicians are flooding the airways right now. Right now, you could be talking about Social Security, how certain Republicans want to cut it. You can be talking about, for instance, the drugs situation.
So, James, I'm sorry, we're going to hit the break here in a minute. Your question?
Why aren't you flooding? Right now, you're flooding the airways with your campaigns. Why aren't you talking about things like Social Security and Medicare?
Okay, let's get the answer from Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, I think, James, in closing, that's what we're doing. That's why as Barack Obama, who is the biggest closer for the Democratic Party, is going around the country, this is something he's talking about. A lot of the commercials you've seen were cut probably 3-4 weeks ago, right? And I've said, this is a disagreement I have nationally, that I don't think we did enough around Social Security. We had some opportunities we missed. But right now it's happening, and when you have the number one closer making this a significant part of what he's talking about, I hope that means the message is getting out, because I talk about it everywhere. Many people I know are talking about it, but this is one where even if the economy, you may be concerned that the global inflation is affecting you right now, what's really going to affect you and your family is having Social Security and Medicare cut, those benefits cut, because if the Republicans have told us, I'm going to come back to this one, Tom. I want to finish it after this, if I can.
Sure. Yeah, actually, Congressman, the next caller wants to ask about Social Security and Medicare, too. So we'll just spring off that.
All right.
We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And we will be back in just a moment. Oh, yeah, no live read here. So we'll be right back. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. 20 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Program, you've hit a lot about the Social Security and Ron Johnson wanting to review that annually. I can't imagine in the community of Fort Dodge in rural Iowa what would happen if the people here lost their Social Security. And I cannot imagine what would happen to our rural hospitals if Medicare was cut. I'm sure a large portion of their funding is seniors and Medicare. I believe it would just devastate our little rural town American hospital, our Iowa and American hospitals. And as far as gas prices, they haven't come down much here in Fort Dodge. I think it's being used as a political weapon. Gas prices, and I believe inflation is being used as a political weapon by the big corporations and the big donors. What say you?
I'm going to take those backwards. Inflation, I just think there's greed. There's corporate greed right now. It's in the proof and the stats, and that is a big driver on inflation. On gasoline, I also agree. I think that oil companies generally don't love Democrats who are putting in electric vehicle charging stations. I think that the artificially high levels that they've kept gasoline for a while is going to continue. Here's the most important point, I think, on Social Security. The Republicans told us for a half a century they're going to go after Roe versus Wade. And they finally got to the point they could stack the Supreme Court with conservative extremists. And guess what? They overturned Roe. Now they're telling us the Republican Study Committee, a big group of Republican members, wants to put Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block every 5 years. People like Ron Johnson every single year. If they're telling you they're going to do something, expect that they will do it. And they will cut benefits, which is our money. We pay that out of our paychecks, and we hold it for when people need it. And if you have that happening, that should scare everyone that Republicans, this is part of their agenda. They set it on Roe and they did it. Trust me, they will do it on Social Security as well.
Marty in Wixom, Michigan. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Congressman. Hello, Tom. My question is, would it be possible for the Dems to get a list of the 22 million people who have already signed up for Biden's college loan forgiveness and send them a targeted message pointing out that it is 6 Republican states that have filed suit to block the program? What better way to emphasize the contrast between Democrats and Republicans and that elections matter?
Yeah, Marty, I mean, I don't know if it's possible. All I know is anything usually involves federal bureaucracy is not quick, and the election is less than a week away, so I don't know if that's possible. But you make a really great point. Where is crime increasing the most? Red states, not blue areas, and yet they're blaming Democrats. Who's trying to stop people from being able to get relief on student debt? Again, Republicans. And all of this is because where they really want to have money go is for tax break for the wealthiest. They're donors. I mean, we've seen this over and over and over again, and you can see it in every single issue that comes up. So you make a valid point. We should talk about it. I just don't know if there's a structure or certainly the time available to be able to do what you're saying.
Maggie in Baltimore, Maryland. Maggie, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, how you guys doing today?
Good. What's your question?
So my question is, this is my first time actually tuning into this radio station, and I can't help but notice that for you and any other candidate, Republican, Democratic, any angle, it's always my only focus, and I'm quoting you what you just said a minute ago, my only focus is getting people out there and getting them to vote. Quote, volunteer your time in the booth, walking door to door, knocking on doors.
Maggie, what's your question?
Yeah, so I just had to lead up to that. Why is your only goal on getting people out to vote instead of not spending your whole campaign and your whole design on creating systems that actually help the communities that you want to vote for you? You all talk about this is what I want to do. This is what I will do when I'm elected.
So you assume people only talk and don't do. Okay, Congressman?
Yeah, so if I understood Maggie's question, I mean, in the final week before election, this is how democracy works, right? And if you don't vote, you don't really have a voice. You can complain about things, you can thank people for things, but the way you actually get something done is by choosing your elected officials. And the greater participation, in my opinion, gives us a greater acknowledgement of whatever that we've been talking about doing for the other 50, 1 weeks of this year and the other, the entire last year. So it's not that we're trying to get other things done. That doesn't make any sense. What we're saying is, if you don't vote, you are choosing not to have a voice for a couple of years on who your federal representatives and some of your state representatives are right now. I'm saying have a voice. Don't be a sheep, a follower. Get out there if you care about things and do that and get people out to vote, because democracy works best when people speak. And if they speak and they vote Republican, then at least they've been heard. If they vote Democrat, they've been heard. But be heard. That is the single message.
And if Maggie's point, and I'm guessing this was it, is that Democrats haven't accomplished anything. They're just asking for votes, which is a popular Republican talking point. I would point out that President Biden has signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. He's reduced student debt, produced student debt relief. By the way, every single Republican opposed the Inflation Reduction Act. Every single Republican opposes reducing student debt. He put in 2 executive orders to safeguard access to reproductive health care. All the Republicans opposed that. He signed the CHIPS Act. Every Republican voted against it. He signed the Science Act into law. Every Republican voted against it. He signed the PACT Act to enhance our benefits for veterans. Every single Republican opposed that. He signed the first major gun safety legislation in decades. I believe every Republican voted against that. There might have been 1 or 2. And I mean, it just goes on. Republicans, 100% of Republicans voted against cheaper gas, cheaper insulin, child tax credits, stimulus checks, and the Voting Rights Act. 99% of Republicans voted against fighting domestic terrorism, against keeping birth control legal. 96% voted against background checks for gun purchasers. 94% of Republicans voted against more baby formula. 87% of Republicans voted against stopping domestic violence. 84% of Republicans voted against veterans' cancer care, for God's sake. 77% of Republicans voted against gay marriage, and 68% of Republicans voted against upholding the last election. So, to say that Democrats are just talking is BS. Forgive me, Congressman, for taking your time. We will be back with Congressman Mark Pocan, Middays with Mark, right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. We'll be right back.
Today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space, Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark. Judd in Meadview, Arizona. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello. How you doing, fellas?
Good.
I wanted to ask, I'm a truck driver, and I wanted to point something out first. I've been on I-85. I started my day in Alabama. I went through Atlanta area, and I saw the most repulsive billboard. It was Uncle Sam pointing, and the words on it were, Democrats hate you.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of that billboard.
I couldn't believe that billboard. I wish I could. I mean, I'm long past there. But the question I had for Mark was, I know they did something they passed a new bill that undid the whole, what they had done to the post office. And so I'm wondering what happened to all that money that was set aside for future benefits. Did it go back to the postal workers, or what happened?
Yeah, so that money wasn't from postal workers. That was just outright money they were putting aside from their profits. It wasn't coming from each individual postal worker because it was prepaying benefits 75 years into the future, which is crazy, right? No business, no other federal agency has to do that. So I assume it's opened up the money to be available to the Postal Service again. But most importantly, is it takes away that artificial loss that comes out every budget to go towards that benefit now can go towards regular operations. So that was a big bill among all the things that Tom mentioned right before the break of the many things that we've done. Also, that bill kept 6-day delivery. The Republicans have been trying to get rid of Saturday delivery as well. So, one more reason why poor Maggie, who called from Maryland, who just found the radio station, Tom, my guess is that she was taking a break from a My Pillow Guy commercial on Fox is how she found it. Maybe, or she just decided to call and try to plant a stupid question. Nonetheless, Judd, you're right. There's a lot right now out there on the commercials, and I think people are smarter than the Republican commercials in many ways, and it's all about making sure people are heard through their voice, and that voice is their vote.
David in Leadwood, Missouri, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Mr. Pocan. Hello, Tom. I just want to talk about the oil companies and the outrageous, in-your-face things that they are doing. I am a stockholder. But back 10 years ago or so, the price of oil was the same as a share of stock. And when that started changing and the oil started going up, I asked my broker, he says, oh, well, that's speculation. There should be a rule against speculation, just like there should be of insider trading. The only other thing I got to say, thank God for the cannabis laws. I was able to grow one plant and have 4 pounds, and I'm not a dealer, but I'm going to give a lot of it away. I think this is how the people on the ground that want things done should handle. We can be kind to each other. But thank you, guys.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, David. And, again, a lot of those cannabis laws happen because of Democratic votes in legislatures and because of people going to the polls and doing those votes. But when it comes to oil companies, David, I can't agree with you enough. My advice a year ago to the Biden administration was to get an oil executive out in front of the American people and flog them, right? I mean, to let them be exposed for what they're doing, because this is all about profits. We give them all of these abilities and land that they can drill on through public lands, and they don't take advantage of it. They don't use it. And then it goes to the overseas selling that Tom talks about a lot. It goes to windfall. There's so many issues that, if we can come through this election like I would like us to, I hope we can really rein that industry in, because it's proven to need reining in.
Steve in Topanga, California, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, gentlemen. I'm very sad listening to what you guys are talking about. I'm a lifelong progressive, and what I hear is, especially after that list that you wrote, that you laid out in terms of what the Democrats have done and how little impact it seems to have, nobody seems to notice. I'm wondering, what is it that's keeping the Congress and the Democrats from focusing on the number one, number two issues that will make a difference? Obviously, abortion and loss of the right to vote. Everything else is a distraction. It's all a distraction.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Well, Steve, I'm not sure if they're the only two issues that are important. I think there are plenty of things important, but we've passed bills out of the House, H.R. 1 and other bills, the John Lewis Voting Act, sent them to the Senate. We've passed bills to codify Roe, sent them to the Senate. Part of the problem is the Senate has rules that were invented when people used to wear white powdered wigs to work. There are still people wearing wigs to work in the Senate, not the white powdered variety, but we haven't changed substantially how the filibuster is done, and that seems to be used right now at this point in history by the minority to obstruct things. That's the real problem. But I think that list that Thom gave, just on healthcare alone, Thom, the fact that we're going to be able to negotiate for drug prices with big pharmaceutical companies, the fact that we can cap out of pocket expenses for seniors down to $2,000 and cap the cost of insulin. This is all huge stuff that you have not seen come before. So if people aren't seeing the benefit, it's because they're choosing to right now, I think, look at inflation. But all of these measures are going to save them money far past when inflation is done, and we need to get that part of the message out.
Yeah, and I didn't even mention the insulin or the $2,000 cap.
Exactly.
I'm writing those down right now. Thank you, Congressman. Sydney in Moore Park, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
I am so I don't even know what to say right now. My blood's kind of boiling. Listen, I respect you, Senator Pocan. I know the Democrats are working their butts off. There's been a blockade in the Senate, right? For since Obama. I mean, what's getting in the way of anything getting done? The Republicans. So what do we do about it? Well, as a layman's person, I didn't know how to canvass. So I learned. It's not Twitter. If you're on Twitter and you're uncomfortable, my question, Senator Pocan, which organizations do you recommend that people just go online and get the support to learn what it means to canvass and to do it? Because guess what? We can still reach 1 million voters right now through @whenweallvote.com, through @movementlabs.com, through Let's Mobilize. Do you have any @nextgen.com? All of these organizations will help you learn how to canvass, volunteer, and get out the vote. Because I used to think tweeting was voting. I used to think knocking on just my neighbor's door was getting out the vote. No, getting out the vote means you talk to other constituents. Am I correct, Senator? Is there anything that you would suggest or organization to help people who are just learning and are scared? Because the last thing I want to do is just be stuck in fear. That is the Republican
Sydney,
playbook.
let's get a response. Thank you.
Yeah, so take that passion and knock on doors, Sydney. I love it. Here's what I would do, honestly, is just reach out to the candidates, the campaigns of the people that you want to help. And I've been doing this, going to launches. That's all I do and all I will do until Election Day often, is going and thanking volunteers. They learn right then and there. It's so easy now because you can do it right on your phone. So don't worry about having to go online and learn something. It will be taught to you. I watched a bunch of people, and this is not meant to be ageist, but in talking about connections to technology, people in their 60s and 70s who were using their phones to work on a voter database door to door, and they learned on the spot as they were going to volunteer. It is that easy now. And really, I just recommend contact those campaigns you care about from wherever they are, and they will teach you how to do that as you're going out to do the doors. It takes minutes.
Mike in Wheeling, West Virginia. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes. I'm a progressive like you, Mark, and also Thom. And back in August, or July, or early August of 2020, Trump came on TV, on national TV, and made a presidential order or executive order that he was going to move Social Security out of the Social Security Disability Fund into the GSA General Fund, which would have bankrupted it for Social Security for retirees within 2 years and disabled people within 6 months. I don't hear that on TV by anybody. My question is you. Can you talk about it and get other people to talk, or maybe Thom can say something? I think it's important because he did this in August or July of 2020. He'll damn well do it again, and there's no doubt about it. Thank you very much, Mark. Thom?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Hey, I'll tell you, though, I honestly believe the single best message to say on Social Security, and I'm going to say it again because if everyone repeats it this way, I think it's easier to understand. When the Republicans told us for half a century they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, they eventually did. They stacked the Supreme Court with conservative extremists, and they overturned Roe. When they tell you, the Republican Study Committee, which is made up of many members, Republican members of Congress, that they want to put Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block every 5 years, and people like Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin wants to put it on the chopping block every year, believe them. They gave us plenty of notice on Roe, and we saw what they could do. Now they're giving you notice on Social Security. You have to assume that that's the intention and get that message out.
Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls for Representative Pocan. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. You can find his website at Pocan, P-O-C-A-N, pocan.house.gov. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with more of your calls for Representative Mark Pocan on Middays with Mark. And welcome back. Liz in Los Angeles, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. I was just wondering why certain phraseology is used. Why do you call it tax break for the rich when it's really welfare for the rich? Why don't you call it welfare for the rich, because people really get that better than tax breaks?
I'll tell you, for me, it's because I don't want to demonize welfare, right? I mean, there are people who generally need assistance. And I remember back when Tommy Thompson was governor in Wisconsin in that era, when people were going after people, checking their license plates, where they're from, and getting their welfare benefits as if any kind of assistance for people who are having a hard time is wrong. I don't know. That's me. I just don't use the word welfare like that. I think when you say, technically it's a tax expenditure. It's money that you would have spent on healthcare or education. You're spending on money to give back to rich people as opposed to the average person. I think we should be talking about that big tax break that happened during the Trump administration, where right now 86% of that money goes to the top 1%. That wasn't something we all benefited from. It was just the people who donate and fund Republican campaigns, and we should be getting that message out. But for me, I just don't like to use welfare to follow what they've tried to do by make it negative, because to me it really is help for people who need it the most at tough times in their life, and I don't want to demonize it.
David in San Francisco, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thanks, Tom and Congressman. That's a good answer, Congressman. And I plead guilty to have used that expression, welfare for the rich. I've done that on a number of talk shows, and I'll take your advice from now on. Recently, with the attack on Pelosi and her husband, apparently Elon Musk started a lot of the rumors by tweeting out just this bizarre collection of conspiracy theories, and he left it on there for about 2 hours. And the very same day he did it, he also was given the ability to launch a top security rocket with his SpaceX program. So I'm wondering if there's going to be an ability to yank Elon Musk's security clearance. This guy has cost America hundreds of millions of dollars by his stupid tweet. This a campaign of bizarre, back and forth about the Pelosi assassination attempt is bad enough, but it will cost America hundreds of millions of dollars. And under normal circumstances, a security clearance would be yanked for far less than that.
David, let's get an answer. Thank you.
Yeah. So, David, I agree with you. I'll tell you, I got a hot over this because, one thing, there's obviously a lot of my colleagues, both Dem and Republican, are getting threats because of the political atmosphere post-Trump, during Trump, that he helped to foster and dig up. And what we saw happen, there's no acceptable violence in political discourse, right? And that's what happened. For Elon Musk, who just bought a company, he must have known, if he's supposed to be such a smart guy, that people are going to read your first tweets. And if your first tweets are putting out that kind of crap, he doesn't have a lot of common sense. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, there's a problem there. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We will be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan on Middays with Mark. We'll be back in 60 seconds after I read an ad for HelloFresh over on the commercial side of the program. Stick around. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. There are no good solid numbers on it, but it appears that the majority of people who have Medicare Advantage programs or plans believe that they're on Medicare. This is certainly how Medicare Advantage is sold. Oh, you're missing out on benefits under Medicare. It's Medicare Part C, don't you know? C for commercial, right? But people don't realize that when you sign up for Medicare Advantage, you are leaving behind Medicare, and you may never be able to get back to it, or at least not in the way that you could have if you had signed up for it when you were 65 and you stayed with it. And now stepping into this void come Congressman Mark Pocan and Congressman Ro Khanna with the new Save Medicare Act that would prevent this kind of deceptive advertising and marketing by forbidding insurance companies and HMOs and whatnot from using the word Medicare to sell these for-profit plans or these so-called Medicare Advantage plans. We all need to be supportive of this. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour, we're picking up your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan here. Joe in Parker, Colorado. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, Representative Pocan. During the Trump administration, the Trump tax cut put a cap of $10,000 on mortgage interest and property tax deduction. And I calculated my taxes last year both ways. And that Trump tax cut cost me an extra $1,000 a year. And I'm wondering, why has not Congress attacked this problem since you got the House, the Senate, and the White House?
Yeah, so that's called the SALT deduction, the state and local tax deduction that the Republicans capped at $10,000. There have been some attempts in some bills drafted to do that. I'm guessing, again, it's probably a problem with the 50-50 Senate because I know in the House, I believe we actually passed something out around that. I do think, though, that at some level, if we have this regressive tax on Medicare or in Social Security, where you're not paying more in at, I think right now it's about $146,000. I could be a little off on that number this year. After that, you don't pay another dime. On this sort of tax, though, for some of the people who are the very wealthiest, they were able to take away an awful lot of their tax liability. And hopefully we'll find something that will work, that can pass both houses. They use that as a revenue source to give money just to the wealthiest. But right now, a lot of the wealthiest were also benefiting from that, depending how much they made, how much property they had.
It's really whacking the middle class, though. I mean, here in Portland, our house is less than $100,000 more than the average price of a home here in Portland. Yeah. And I just got my property tax bill. It's over $15,000. I can't deduct that. That's crazy.
And that's the range we should be addressing, and maybe not worrying about Elon Musk's mansions or others where they can benefit.
Right, exactly. Bob in San Jose. Hey, Bob, what's up? You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. I would like to see if you can study the parallel between the interstate highway system, which was funded by the Department of Defense, and the Internet, which also was funded by the Department of Defense. Isn't the Internet a utility and should be basically delivered to everyone at cost? Right now, many people are, like I am, paying $50 to $100 a month just to have access to the Internet, and even then, it's through a provider with quotes on that can filter what I can see. They can decide what they will or won't let me look at. To me, this is more like the highways, and it's a common good. So I would like to find out if Congress can step in and say to the FCC, no, this is a common good, these are common carriers, and we're doing it at cost. What do you think?
So the only asterisk I'd put on that, Bob, and I agree with you, I think, the fact that if providers don't want to put broadband out, for example, because it's too costly in more rural areas, people don't have access. I mean, these days it's like having electricity or water, right? We have to have broadband. The difference with the highway example is the highways are largely built by public entities, governments, and the infrastructure that goes in for broadband is done by private companies. Not making an excuse, I formed a rural broadband caucus, a bipartisan caucus to address this. I live in a very rural area, a rural town of 830 people. I only got broadband about 5 years ago. So trust me, I know what you're saying. But there is that distinction of a difference in that it is the private companies putting that in. Now, we give them a lot of that money to build that infrastructure, and they wait till they get that money. So, again, your point is well taken. But I'm more concerned right now about where they don't want to put broadband. Everyone has to have it in 2022. We need to be doing something greater to get that access out there.
Jeff in Canton, Ohio, you're on the air with Representative Pocan. And we're getting down to the last 2 minutes here.
Good day, gentlemen. Mr. Pocan, I was wondering how safe democracy is up there in the state of Wisconsin.
That was a very succinct question, Jeff. Thank you. We have really, I think, some of the best elections and how they're run. I used to, when I was in the legislature, we had a review of one of the election cycles. And I made a comment about how you're more likely to get struck by lightning than commit in-person voter fraud. And PolitiFact gave one of their not so often truths, because that's true. We actually have a very good system. We even allow same-day registration in Wisconsin. And I think one of the reasons Scott Walker didn't change that is because that's how his kids voted, and it would have been pretty hypocritical. So we've been fortunate with those tools in place, and we don't have what we're seeing right now in Michigan and Arizona and some places where these armed folks are watching drop boxes, but we don't have drop boxes because of our conservative Supreme Court. I think our elections will probably be run pretty fairly, and that will help as long as we get people out to vote. If people get out to vote, we can, I think, be in pretty good place in Wisconsin come next Tuesday.
You've got a gerrymandering problem, though, right?
Our legislature is severely gerrymandered. I think in the last cycle, 54% people voted Democrat. We got 36% of the seats in the assembly.
Wow.
Clearly it's a huge problem. What we're facing is if we lost a couple extra seats this time, we could actually not be able to uphold the governor's vetoes. I'm hoping that doesn't happen again. All about turnout on Tuesday.
There you go. Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's always great having you on the program.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Thanks to everybody.
Yep. Thank you. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Up next, Professor Richard Wolff. Is it time to nationalize the oil and gas industries? Seriously? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives jurisprudence or guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. A lot going on in our economy. It looks like the inflation, which appears to be mostly caused by corporate price gouging. We have multiple, actually, members of Congress suggesting that it's 54% of total U.S. inflation is corporate price gouging, and the rest of it is the price of oil. That the Saudi Arabia and Russia, with Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine, are driving up the price of oil. So today, Jay Powell, the lifelong Republican, former bankster, head of the Fed, is expected to raise interest rates. And, nobody's really talking about what we should do about the price of oil. Professor Richard Wolff is on the line with us, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. The Sickness is a System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself is his most recent, also available as an ebook. And he's also the host of Economic Update with Professor Richard Wolff right here on Free Speech TV. Professor Wolff, I'm curious your thoughts on what might happen in today's Fed meeting and what its impact will be. And then B, has the time for nationalization of oil and gas arrived? And you might want to describe what that is and what that might mean.
Okay, sure. The guessing game on the Federal Reserve action today is really only whether it'll raise interest rates 0.5 point or 0.75 point. Both of those are larger than the traditional movements have ever been. Those have been limited usually to 0.25 point. It's a sign that the inflation is still with us, big time. It's just as likely to get worse in the next few months as to get better or stay the same. The Federal Reserve is committed now to fighting it. I want to remind everyone the Federal Reserve is supposed to prevent inflations. It failed to do that. It's supposed to fix them when they occur. It so far failed to do that. So now it's taking the next step. But anyone who believes that they have this situation under control must not have been paying attention over the many, many occasions when they haven't, number one. Number two, absolutely the question of nationalization always is on the agenda. Why? All that nationalization means is that the government takes over the business. There are many different forms of doing that. You can buy shares in the company if you're the government. You can give them a massive loan that puts them in your debt. You can literally take them over and make them a government enterprise. All of those things have been done in the past. All of those things are being done today, and all of those things have been done by the United States government in our past. No one should think it's a path-breaking new idea. It has been squashed in recent decades because of the neoliberal ideology that usually goes back to Thatcher and Reagan, in which everything that the public does is somehow bad and everything that the private sector does is somehow good. But it's the private sector whose decisions about whether or not to invest in fossil fuels, whether or not to increase production, and so on. That's led us to the situation we're in now. I know it's convenient to blame the war in Ukraine. There's always something else going on that you can point the finger to. But the bottom line is, if you leave the energy of a society in the hands of private enterprise, you're going to get decisions that are governed and guided by private profit maximization. That's what they're in the business to do. That's what they focus on doing it. So their decisions are always affected by what's going on in the society, but they're governed by how to maximize the profit. The whole idea of the government coming in is that it would not be governed by that. The job of the government is to make the decisions that are best for the people that they're the government of. All of them, not the subsection that depend on profit, but all of us, those of us who depend on wages or salaries, who are the majority, rather than the minorities whose income comes out of the profit sector of our economy. So the question isn't so much whether to nationalize. I understand that's in the air now, that we're paying wild prices for energy and suffering an inflation in large part because of it. That's why these issues come up. But the real question, what kind of nationalization? And let me just add one point. In the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, the federal government nationalized General Motors. It took a different form, but that's what it was. And the peculiar thing that reminded us of is that the only time people who love capitalism want the government to come in is when something is really going wrong. An industry is failing. That was the case of General Motors. Or in these days, an industry is requiring us to pay prices that literally destroy our economy. What we ought to have is a government called in, but if it's going to be called in and using up taxpayer money, which is what we're talking about, then it ought to have a benefit that comes to it. If General Motors recovers, it has to share some of that recovering with the American people whose taxes got them through the crisis. We never do that. Other countries do it. The government holds a share of the company and picks up dividends, picks up economic recovery, which the government helps to produce. But in our country, covered over with this liberal capitalist ideology, we are asked to bail out our industries, but we're never allowed the government to share in. And if the government shared, then it would use that money and lower our taxes, because we wouldn't have to tax the rest of us, including businesses, to keep going, because it would get part of the recovery that it helped to create. And my fear now is we're going to call in the government, bail out the fossil fuels, because they're terrified that the fossil fuels will become useless once the sanction war with Russia is over, because we have to go to safer fuels to save us from the climate disasters that we're facing. And then the fossil fuel industry will collapse. Then our banking system, which is in up to here lending money to fossil fuels, will collapse. And the government always will be called in to save them. It'll cost a fortune. And Lord knows how we'll pay for it, given the condition of the American economy. Bottom line, this is an enormous mess, and we're not giving it the attention that it needs, because it's going to be a problem that tests the very ability of this economy to survive.
Would one of the ways that our federal government could nationalize the oil industry, or at least parts of it, for example, ExxonMobil, an American-based company, it might be a little more difficult with Royal Dutch Shell or something like that, but
very much more.
Yeah. Would one of the ways that they could do that to be to simply go into the stock market and buy a controlling interest of shares?
Absolutely. That has the way it's been done in the past. You could make an exchange. If these companies need massive amounts of credit or money to invest if they need it, or credit to get through a decline in the price, if that's what happens, you could exchange. They could get access to such money from the government in exchange with providing the government with shares. By the way, that happened back in 2008 and 9. Various financial companies got had to give shares to the government. But notice, they gave them non-voting shares, which the government accepted. I mean, to the amazement of those of us watching. Why? Why would you give up control over an entity that was so desperate it turned to you, the government, to bail them out? You did them that service, and now you're not giving them any say whatsoever about the massive amount of taxpayer money you just handed to them. There's no rationale for that unless you have a almost religious belief that the government should only be there to bail out the companies, never have in return any kind of control. Nobody in their right mind does that sort of thing, even in a market economy, except the government, which is why we're only talking about nationalizing oil, because we're suffering by the way that oil is being dealt with in the world. You know, whatever your position on the Ukraine war, it would have been a little smarter had the West and the United States understood that if you go after Russia with sanctions, they're going to want to push back. And very few things they have. They're a much poorer economy than the United States. One of the few things they have is their extraordinary control over the price of oil and gas because they have so much of it. I mean, that doesn't take rocket science. And you might then have figured, whoa, maybe we ought to work out some other solution to this problem, lest it become, in the realm of inflation and oil and energy, a much bigger problem for the human race than the issues of Ukraine could ever have been.
Okay. Perhaps a solution like stopping the export of oil from the United States so that we, well, in any case.
At least they should have been looked at.
There's a lot of alternatives. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, the website, Prof. Wolff on Twitter. Professor Wolff, thank you for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
It's 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Is most of America's inflation about monopolies, price gouging, and oil barons fleecing us? I think so. We'll be right back with that. And welcome back. John in Gulf Ridge, Florida. Hey, John, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I enjoyed Professor Wolff's synopsis, and I would like to suggest some things that could be done very easily by President Biden that would address the inflationary issues as well as the oil gouging by the major oil companies in the United States. And when I say that these things have been done in the past, for instance, there was a windfall profits tax made upon all the major oil companies back in the 70s.
Yeah, it was Nixon's.
That was done by a stroke of the pen.
Or was it Jerry Ford? I don't recall, but yeah, it was during that era.
Yeah, Jerry Ford. Yeah, it was Jerry Ford at that time.
Yeah.
Windfall profits tax. All it says is, hey, you can't make more than this percentage of profit on your oil sales. Anything over that goes to the government in the tax.
Right.
Windfall profit. That could be extended also to the major 500 companies that are also gouging the public at the supermarket. Hey, you can sell your product, but you can't make over 8% a year increase in income while we're going through this period of difficulty. Then talking about the oil itself, why don't we open up the pipeline that was shut down? Why can't we continue with that project? President Biden
because that pipeline was not producing gasoline. That pipeline was, a very dirty form of crude that was going down to the Gulf Coast. This is why they tried to get it down to the Gulf Coast. All of that oil coming from Canada, going all across the United States and threatening our aquifers and our wildlife and everything else. All of that oil was destined for refineries that are exporting all the refined products. We keep the poison. The oil companies export the mostly diesel fuel and and things like asphalt, the heavy stuff that they get out of it. But, it was just, that was an absolutely stupid way to do it. But, hey, I believe it was the Koch brothers who owned that refinery down there. So there was a lot of political pressure. Once the Venezuelan oil, which is what used to be refined in that refinery, but that got cut off. Once that got cut off, they needed another source of dirty oil, and thus the whole tar sands thing. But, or at least that's my understanding of it, John.
You're correct, Tom. However, there are ways to offset and mitigate those kinds of
All we have to do
problems.
is just stop exporting oil. We're exporting 29% of the oil that we produce in the United States. And we're importing about 29% of our oil. We're importing about 30% of our oil. And that just doesn't make any sense. And people say, well, that's because there's differences between light, sweet, and, crude and heavy crude and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Well, from 1975 until 7 years ago, until 2015, it was illegal to export crude oil from the United States. We didn't export any except to Canada. That was the one exception to the law. So, it certainly is possible. It worked out just fine for us. And if we went back to that, frankly, I think that, we would not be in this high gas price situation. Because if we kept all that oil in the United States, there would be a surplus of oil. We would be awash in fossil fuel products. Not that that's necessarily a good thing. John, thanks for the call. Not that that's necessarily a good thing, but over the short term, as we make this hopefully very rapid transition to an electrified economy and renewable energies, it would at least provide some political and economic stability. We'll be back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Our phrase for the day is narcissistic collapse. This is what happens when a person like Donald Trump with severe narcissistic personality disorder can no longer maintain the facade of their own greatness. When the lies that they have used to build this facade begin to disintegrate, they either implode, typically through drugs or alcohol or other kind of semi-suicidal behavior or even suicide itself. They typically either implode or, more frequently, they explode. They start blaming everybody around them or whatever institutions they can to deny that the collapse is their own fault. They cannot accept the blame. It's part of their narcissistic personality disorder. And instead, they go after the institutions or the people who are pointing out their failure. In the case of Donald Trump, going after the FBI, going after the courts. Look out. This is going to get really, really ugly. I've got a whole long video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 22 minutes past the hour. My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, "Is Most of America's Inflation About Monopolies, Price-Gouging, and Oil Barons Fleecing Us?" And just to get right to the right to the point, yes! What we're finding, and Katie Porter did a great job of pointing this out in a video and a tweet. I embedded the tweet into my article today, that 54% of the inflation America is experiencing right now is from excess corporate profits. Corporate profits way over and above anything that we've seen in since the 1930s, since the last Republican Great Depression. Raising interest rates will do nothing to reduce corporate profits. Nothing. But it will slow down the economy. It'll throw people out of work. The Fed is operating on the assumption that employees demanding raises are the cause of inflation. In fact, average pay is lagging inflation by about 3% right now. And, so taking a 2x4 upside the head to our economy, which is what Jerome Powell is going to do today, that's not going to help a whole lot. I mean, yeah, if you produce a recession, you can reduce inflation somewhat. But when 54% of your inflation is caused by corporate greed, and another 30 or 40% of your inflation is caused by oil companies squeezing every last penny of profit out of the American consumer at the pump, then, raising interest rates is going to do nothing for that. The bottom line is Well, here's an example. The United States, most of our industries in the United States are monopolized. Large corporations, multiple, handful of corporations that control entire industries that operate as cartels, essentially. When Delta raises their airline prices $100 a ticket, United does, 5 seconds later. That kind of thing. Well, that's also the case in Japan. Japan has, some very, very large companies that dominate the Japanese economy. The difference between us and Japan is that Japan has laws in place that tax companies when their profits are obscene or out of line. They have essentially windfall profits taxes in Japan. So what's the inflation rate in Japan right now? 3%. What's the inflation rate in the United States right now? 8.5%. And like I said, the 54% of that, according to Katie Porter, is directly from corporate profits. So you can have a monopolized economy and have significant regulation of it, like we used to do with AT&T. We used to have one phone company in the United States. We regulated them very heavily so that they didn't rip us off because they had a monopoly. We do the same thing with our water companies, with our electric companies, with our sewage companies. These are, whether they're privately owned or publicly owned, but particularly when they're privately owned, these are essentially monopolies. You only have one water pipe coming into your house. You only have one power cable coming into your house. You only have one septic line leaving your house. That's a monopoly. And so what we say to these companies is you must operate within these limits. You can't just randomly rip people off. Well, now we've got basically every sector of our economy monopolized, but we have stopped, unlike Japan, we have stopped regulating profits. And so either we need to break up these big corporations and restore competition, which will lower prices, which is what I'm recommending, or we need to do what Japan did and start regulating profits. And we can do that over the short term with the oil industry. We should be doing that right away. But I think, Joe Biden is talking about breaking up the big behemoths. They just blocked this merger between Random House and Simon & Schuster, which is a good thing. They're looking with a jaundiced eye towards this, Kroger and Albertsons merger, I believe it is. So there's a bunch of places here where there are possibilities where the Biden administration is the first administration since basically 1980, since Jimmy Carter, to talk about, breaking up giant corporations. Reagan, of course, in 1983 directed the FTC, the DOJ, and the FEC to stop, or the to stop enforcing the antitrust laws. That's how we got in this mess.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And frankly, we need to go back to enforcing those antitrust laws. They're still on the books. What say you?
Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control. With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. Book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Joe Biden has done a lot. He signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. He announced targeted student debt relief plan. He issued 2 executive orders to safeguard access to reproductive health care. He signed the CHIPS and Science Act into law. He signed the PACT Act into law for our veterans. We have historically low unemployment rates, lower than we've had since the 1960s. He helped our economy recover through the American Rescue Plan. He confirmed our first black justice to the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. He expanded the NATO alliance. He rallied our allies in support of Ukraine. He's made once-in-a-generation infrastructure investments. We have record enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. More Americans have health care now than ever before, over the objections of the Republicans, I might add. Historic funding for HBCUs, the historically black college and universities. He reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. I mean, just step by step, there has been so much that has been accomplished. In the face of all this Republican obstruction, there's a video with the complete list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Marvin in Cincinnati. Hey, Marvin, what's on your mind today?
Well, I got in. Let me see if I can word this right. I know that you have to choose to apply for Medicare Advantage, but you don't get a choice on that REACH program. So I was wondering if one of your senators might tell us a way that we can sue these companies that are pushing us into these REACH programs without our permission.
Did you get pushed into one, Marvin?
I think so. The hospital system that owns all of our doctor's offices. I saw some paperwork some time ago where all of us got pushed into it. They're putting everybody into an ACO, which is that REACH program.
Yeah, the ACO REACH. Wow. Have you?
Without our permission.
Yeah. It's a question I don't know the answer to, Marvin. You might want to check SocialSecurityWorks.com. Who are real champions on this issue. You might want, let's see, you're in Ohio, you might want to call Sherrod Brown's office, one of your senators. He's good on this stuff, and point this out. I mean, this is something that more and more of us need to be flagging for folks. Have you tried contacting the Medicare, the Center for Medicare Services, CMS, and asking if you can shift back to real Medicare?
I haven't, but I have tried to talk to my doctor's office, and the people that I'm able to talk to, like at the doctor's office, none of them seem to know that this even happened.
Right. Yeah, they probably don't. Yeah. But I would suggest that you call Medicare as your first step. You also reach out to Senator Brown's office. He needs to know about this.
And what was that other one? Social Security what?
SocialSecurityWorks.com.
Okay.
I think it's .com. Might be .org. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's .org. Yeah, you should. Yeah, so check that out. Okay, Marvin. Thanks a lot for the call. Good luck. Mark in Salamanca, New York. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, Tom. I'd like to direct this especially to everybody who is living and voting in the state of Nevada. In 2018, the Laxalt family, 12 of the members of that family wrote a letter to the Reno Gazette urging everyone in that state to vote against their relative who's now running for the U.S. Senate. They said that their relative was born in Nevada. He spent maybe a couple of months there as a child or an infant, then was moved to Washington, D.C., and grew up out there and came back to Nevada the year before he announced he was running for governor. Wow. That was in 2018.
And did he succeed in getting the governorship? Forgive my ignorance of Nevada politics.
Sure. No, he lost that.
He lost that, okay.
Now, as you know, he's running for the Senate now. Yep. And this year, 14 members of that family, some of which are Republicans, but some of which are not. I don't have the exact breakdown. But 14 members that now, just recently in October, wrote to that same place urging people to vote for Catherine Cortez masked out. They say that their relative is a fraud. He goes to these kind of fairs and festivals. I'm sorry about that.
Well, he's a Republican, so you expect him to be a fraud. Yeah, Mark, we're getting. Yeah, there you go. Mark, isn't there a Laxalt kind of political dynasty in Nevada? Wasn't there a Laxalt who was a big deal many years ago?
Well, the grandfather was governor, and he was also a U.S. senator.
That's my recollection, from when I was younger, way younger.
Yeah, there is a political dynasty there, but let me just say quickly, there was a young Kennedy, I believe the grandson of Robert Kennedy, who ran against Ed Markey recently. Mm-hmm. and lost the Democratic nomination for the Senate there.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is that these people, whether they're on the left or right, what bothers me is that they run based on who they know.
Right, or
Not
who
what
they're related to. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly.
So Paul Laxalt is trying to pull the old rope-a-dope there in Nevada. I get it. Mark, thanks. Thanks for pointing all that out and for the backstory. I appreciate it. Alan in West Chicago, Illinois. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
I want to talk about net metering, if I could.
Sure. For people who don't know what you're talking about, net metering is where you have solar panels on your house, and when you are not using as much electricity as your solar panels are producing, you get to feed it back into the grid, and the power company has to pay you for the electricity. Is that what we're talking about here, Alan?
That is exactly what we're talking about. All states have a net metering law. I have homes both here in Illinois and in Florida, but the net metering laws limit the amount of credit I can get for the power I produce in my home.
That's right. This is common across the United States. It's not in every state, but there's in pretty much every state where you've got huge utilities who've been able to lobby the state legislatures. This is a problem.
And in my home in the Illinois area, West Chicago, I could produce about 2,500 kilowatt hours a month of electricity, but I only need about 750. Therefore, I could produce enough power to cover 3 homes in my neighborhood or anywhere in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And if we eliminate the net metering laws, I'd be willing to put solar panels on my entire home, because the payback for me would be about 14 years.
Wow. So you're limited in how much of that power you can feed back into the grid by the net metering laws in Illinois.
Yes, and it's the same. They're the same in Florida. The same laws in Florida.
Yeah, that's not good. Alan, thanks for raising the issue. I don't have an easy or glib answer to, this is the sort of thing where the utilities got out ahead of the people. And, when we reach the point where enough people have solar panels on their roofs that they can form a voting block, then, things might change. But for right now, the legislators are taking money from and paying attention to the lobbyists for the for-profit utilities rather than consumers.
Two other points that would help us all understand this. If you put solar panels on all the roofs in the U.S. In a space that would work, about 40% of our power needs could be provided by solar.
Right.
In Illinois, that would eliminate the natural gas it takes to generate that electricity. And it would eliminate me having 2 utilities here in Illinois, 1 natural gas and 1 electricity.
Right. There
and over a 30-year period of time, what the professor was speaking about, the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energies, all of the labor issues he talked about, all the financial issues we talked about, would take care of themselves, because it will take us a while to transfer. I would not eliminate my gas-powered furnace that I just paid $20,000 to install last year for an electric one until that one didn't work. But I would absolutely buy all electric appliance going forward.
Right. We all
with that, Tom, I thank you.
We make the transition as we can. Alan, thank you very much. A very thoughtful comment there. And something we all need to be paying attention to. David in Danbury, Connecticut. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm wondering if the Congress can renew Social Security and Medicare benefits every 5 years as they're planning. Why can't we renew all the tax breaks that we've given to the millionaires and billionaires since Reagan?
Oh,
they seem to go on forever.
It's a good question. It's not going to happen, number one. but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's a good one, David. David, thank you very much for that. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Good. What's up? How are you, Randy? And what's up?
I wanted to touch on what you just spoke about a little bit ago, and then what Professor Wolff was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The antitrust issues are the big issues that we need to, and there'll be a political price to pay for that by the corporations, like the politicization of inflation. You know, the corporations taking profits and stuff because they don't like who's in office. But the point I'd really like to make, I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
Is that the first time I heard this term was back in 2009 when Governor Terry Branstad, the ex-governor, was running for office again in Iowa and would capture the office from a pretty decent politician in 2010. And that is public-private partnerships. Now, this has been a philosophy of the Republican Party, the hard Republican Party, for 15 years going on, or 10 years. Yep. And the thing is that this graft, where corporations are grafting themselves onto government to get to pay their own profits, to extract profits from the government and the taxpayers, and getting investments like Professor Wolff was saying when they were in trouble and they were buying stock but weren't getting voting rights.
Right.
We have to do something. There has to be a wall. Somebody has to be aware. And I don't think that Mr. Biden can do anything about it right now. And it's about to make me a praying man, hoping that we retain a blue leadership in this country.
I get it, Randy. And public-private partnerships are one of the great scams. It's like Medicare Advantage. It's another one of these corporate scams to extract more money from us, in this case from our taxpayer dollars. Well, I guess Medicare Advantage is taking our taxpayer dollars too. Randy, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much for, appreciate it. Thank you. Back at you. And thank you for thoughtful commentary there. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
FYI, they're reporting today that the Parkland gunman is going to be sentenced to life in prison down in Florida. And welcome back. Marilyn in Taneytown, Marilyn in Taneytown, Maryland. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
I'd like to talk a little bit about inflation, if I may.
Please.
Well, we fought and won a war back in the old days.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways we did it was price control.
Yep.
I don't hear a word about that today. How come?
Well, when Jerry Ford, and I'm going to have to go back and check my facts, I believe it was Jerry Ford who put into place the windfall profits tax. And Richard Nixon tried wage and price controls in '73, I believe it was. What happened, well, actually, probably the Nixon experience is the one that people are more familiar with. He suppressed wage and price increases to try to stop inflation. And what happened was when his controls expired, everything just exploded. It just all bounced right back. It's like you're trying to, control almost a natural force, or at least you're trying to control some really, really large macro forces. In this case, it was the price of oil. The Arab oil embargo, the shortage of oil, actually. You're trying to control that with price controls, and price controls can't control the availability of oil. So I think generally wage and price controls, I'm a fan of windfall profits taxes, and I'm a fan of breaking up big corporations to restore competition, because competition is the principal thing that regulates profits. Companies will operate at the minimal profit necessary in order to be competitive. But wage and price controls, I'm not convinced have ever really worked. Do you know of an example where they have, Marilyn, in our history?
Oh, I lived through it.
You're talking about World War II?
Yep.
Yeah, well, what happened in 1946, 47, 48? We had huge inflation as a result of the ending of those price controls.
Tom, that was the end of the war. I'm talking about
point.
the war. I'm 90 years old.
Yeah, no, I get it, but and good on you, Marilyn. What I'm saying is that when the wage and price controls expire, then it all blows up in your face. You get the inflation anyway.
But granted, all those people that we are paying down in Washington, and I have also lived down near on the border of Washington, and know how that works too. Make them put their heads together and do some work for a change. They must be able to come up with something that would work without suddenly crashing.
Yeah. I think so, and like I said, I think a windfall profits tax, at least on the oil industry, on the fossil fuel industry, would be a really good start. I think that breaking up some of these giant monopolies. I also think that we should be looking at ownership of the largest refinery in the United States, which the Saudis bought during the Trump administration in 2017. That all of these things should be on the table, and we should be looking. Oh, and also that we should go back to the law that we had that Nixon put into place, or maybe it was Jerry Ford. It started in '75. I guess that was Ford. Right up until 2015, which said that it was illegal to export oil from the United States. If we just kept the oil in the United States, we could have some control over prices here. But I'm with you, Marilyn. They should be putting their heads together and getting this under control. Marilyn, thank you for the call, and thanks for the historical perspective. It's so nice to hear from you. It is 10 minutes before the hour, soon to be 9 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just 60 seconds, so stick around. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. The Democrats need to start campaigning on family values. It's a great platform. The Republicans have already kind of softened it up for us. What are family values? Well, Franklin Roosevelt talked about this. Lyndon Johnson talked about this. Jack Kennedy talked about this. Family values, strong public schools, a national health care program, and drug costs under control, getting these out-of-control pharmaceutical companies under control. Good pay for mom and dad when they're working, and unions. Outlaw homelessness by housing homeless people. Make it illegal for communities to encourage homelessness, basically, by not having enough housing available. Accept people across the entire LGBTQ spectrum into our families. That's a family value, a fundamental family value. Pure food, our food supply, rather than polluting it with poisons and junk food, should be good. Our air and water need to be clean. Climate change, we need to get it under control. There's a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. "52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Your calls. Thomas in Hackettstown, New Jersey. Hey, Thomas, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about inflation.
Go for it.
So from the end of the Gulf War until 2020, basically, we had a 2% inflation rate, right? So
I believe.
So, yes. So obviously in the last 18 months, we didn't have a monopolization of the economy that overthrew that 30-year track record. What is the difference is post-Gulf War until 2020, the money supply only grew by like 5%. We had a 2% inflation rate and a 3% growth rate. But then during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve was really the bad actor in this, although admittedly Mr. Biden renominated Powell to the chair, which is beyond me. But they grew the money supply by 40%. And the ensuing inflation is inevitable. It's like they were building a bonfire, piling wood on it. And when the economy reopened,
and they were doing that, I think, in large part because Trump was leaning on them so hard. I mean, he was publicly berating them almost every day until Powell really started pouring this money in, and they went for the quantitative easing. So you're suggesting that the main reason...
To be fair, we had quantitative easing in 21 also.
Right. But there was a continuation of a process that started in 2020. So what you're arguing is that it's actually the debasing of our currency that led to our inflation.
Yeah, like the overprinting of money. That, like you said, it's in some sense a natural thing that has to work its way out.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I mean, it's great that people are spending again and out there, but with all the lockdowns and whatnot, people were hoarding that money. That's why we didn't have immediate inflation.
Yeah,
well, now
people
we
were
don't
buying,
have to hoard it anymore.
Yeah, people were buying goods rather than services too, and that was creating dislocations. All good points, Thomas. All excellent points.
One final, if I could.
Yeah.
If you're, since like you said, people are not making money, they're not getting paid and they're not earning on their savings. That means they're going to continue to buy because it's a hedge against inflation. They're not saving. The savings rate's crashing as well.
Right. So. That's the inflationary spiral that is so deadly. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Thomas, thank you. Tammy in Coconut Beach, Florida. Hey, Tammy, what's on your mind today?
Hi. The caller who had the issue with the ACO REACH program,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually Physicians for a National Health Plan that are fighting it.
Uh-huh.
And Pramila Jayapal is helping them. So she issued that letter with I think it's about 80 signatures, House Dems calling on Biden and CMS to cancel the program. And by the way, Liz Fowler, a disciple of Max Baucus, she's the one who, the architect of the conversion of DCE to ACO REACH.
Wow.
And DCE was Trump's, was done by executive order, so Biden can repeal this. So maybe after the election, you can focus more on this and get PNHP on your program, get Jayapal to talk about this. And one more thing, Tom, the Andy Biggs nomination is set for mid-November in the Senate. He's the architect of Social Security privatization under George Bush. And maybe you can focus on that because we need to stop him.
They're trying to put him where?
Social Security Advisory Board.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, and Sanders, I called his office. I was freaking out. And they were very clear. Sanders was not happy about that. So maybe we can start a drive to have Sanders filibuster that nomination.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, but maybe you can be a really big help in bringing this issue up.
I will do everything I can, Tammy. PNHP is regularly on our program, and your points are all well taken. Thank you. And our previous caller who thought the ACO REACH slammed him should also reach out to Pramila Jayapal's office. That's a great suggestion. And to PNHP, for that matter. PNHP.org is their website. Tammy, thank you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Greg Palast, the world-famous investigative, I mean that literally, investigative journalist who, if you go over to gregpalast.com right now, over on the right-hand side of his homepage, there's a little ad that says, Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman. Stream it for free for a limited time.
Yes.
Greg, welcome back. Tell us about this.
Okay, especially for Hartman listeners. And Tom, since you're by the way, you're in the credits because without you, this film would not happen. But let me tell you, right now, Jamie Foxx has put up, the actor has put up funds so that we can have a national free screening, virtual online, starting today for the next 2 days. It's free. Just go to vigilantemovie.com, vigilantemovie.com. Thank you, Jamie Foxx. And of course, thank you, our executive producers, Martin Sheen, George DiCaprio, and Stephen Nemeth. Maria Flores, our producer, she got the Academy Award for Best Documentary already. She says this will be number 2. It's a movie, but you know what? It's Vigilante, even though the subtitle is Georgia's Vote Suppression Hitman. Anyone who thinks that this is just about Georgia, I'm sorry, you haven't been listening to the Hartman program. You didn't listen to the prior book excerpt. This is the history.
So tell us,
crushing votes.
Why the word vigilante?
Because Brian Kemp, he's the putative governor of Georgia, going for his rematch against Stacey Abrams, signed a bill last year, SB 202, or Jim Crow 2.2 as NAACP calls it, which allows any voter, anyone, to challenge an unlimited number of other voters. So in other words, you're self-appointed vigilantes. And in the film, we even have one guy who likes to dress up like a vigilante. And you can laugh, but he happens to be the chairman of the Republican Party in Columbus, Georgia, and close to Kemp on his state committee. This is a real Republican power. Puts on his 6 guns, loaded, by the way, and challenged 4,000 people, especially soldiers from Fort Benning, which is in Columbus, including, as I've mentioned before, Major Gamaliel Turner, who is in the film, and you get to meet his family. He's assigned to California. He's working on a new weapon for Ukraine, Major Turner, and they challenge his vote, saying you're not a Georgia citizen anymore. Just because he's a soldier assigned to another military base, they refuse to send him his absentee ballot. 4,000 people in Muskogee, Fort Benning, lost their votes to this Republican mass challenge. It got no coverage, except you'll see it in our film. And the other crazy woman who chases me out of her house with her automatic weapons, et cetera, 32,000 voters. We have a list, by the way, Tom, of 168,000 voters challenged by these self-appointed vigilante vote theft hunters. And it's devastating because you have to go into an office to restore your vote. But it's the story of these people, but also of history. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, and that's the point, is that you're going into the history of other vigilantes. They used to call themselves the Ku Klux Klan. Now they call themselves, they dress up in different ways. They're Civil War reenactors, or a guy who likes to dress like a vigilante, like Doc Holliday, who did, by the way, you'll find out in the film, gun down black men in cold blood while they were bathing.
Whoa, tell me that story.
Yeah, well, what happened is Doc Holliday, who is a Georgian, who's portrayed by the Republican Party chairman, he actually went right after Civil War. There were Union troops bathing in his local watering hole, and he didn't like it that they were black soldiers. So he literally gunned them down while they're in the water. That's why he head out to the Oklahoma territory. This guy likes to dress like him. Understand? They know they can't wear white sheets anymore. But if you just think, oh, it's a nutcase. These are important. 88 of these vigilantes, every single one is a GOP activist official, usually high-ranking official, who are making these challenges overwhelmingly to black voters and young voters. Like I say, it's 168,000, but it's spreading. In the Georgia law, it says you can put in an unlimited number of voters. This one woman literally handed in a thumb drive because it was too expensive to list 32,000 people. By the way, I showed her the names and photos of people that in the film, of course, show her the names, the photos of the people that she challenged. It said that they are not Georgians. I said, they're your neighbors. Did you call them? Did you go to their houses? Did you notify them? No. They got this all from that group, True the Vote in Texas. You know, the one that came out with 2,000 mules. And they're the ones who came up with these lists of voters to challenge. Right. And it's up to the voter to save their vote. So you see that film, but you also see, and today we'll have a story out in Black Gwinnett magazine, that, you know, it was Brian Kemp's family that brought the first enslaved Africans to Georgia. It was
that's an amazing story.
But it's an important story because, remember, the governor signed another bill saying you can't teach critical race theory, or as the bill says, you can't teach divisive history. And that's pretty much being
you can't teach the history of Brian Kemp's family in Georgia in the public schools.
You got it.
So, Greg, in Georgia, you've got 186,000, if I'm remembering correct, or 168,000 people who have been challenged, and they are not going to be able to vote this week?
Well, okay, it's going to be a battle. And by the way, under this new law, they can challenge you, and there's a big fear from some law professors it's going to be a mass challenge on Election Day or literally the day after to mailed-in ballots. And so we know it's at least 168,000 people on the list. Our work has done quite a bit because a member of the Gwinnett County Board rejected 31,000 challenges. They say that they had read my material. So they're understanding that there's no question that it's a targeting of African Americans. Yeah.
We're talking with Greg Palast, investigative reporter Greg Palast, about his new movie, Vigilante, which for the next 2 days you can watch for free. You can go to gregpalast.com, which most of my listeners are familiar with, and there's a little ad for it in the right-hand corner, the right-hand side of the page there. You can just click on it. It says Vigilante free screening. Or you can go to, what's the website, Greg?
Vigilantemovie.com. Vigilantemovie.com. Again, there's no, you can always donate if you want, but there's no charge.
Right.
And the important thing is that you get this history. And by the way, it is a movie. Yeah. I mean, Tom, I think you've seen it. So it's a movie. You can eat popcorn. I mean, you might choke on your popcorn a couple times by either laughing or literally it's
and you can stream it,
devastating.
Stream it at home on your TV. I mean, most people have the ability to do that. So, Greg, it has this vigilante effort, anybody can challenge thousands, tens of thousands of voters in Georgia. Has this spread or begun to spread to other states?
Yes.
Has ALEC taken this up yet as model legislation?
Well, let's put it this way. I just got a call from the election supervisor in Houston, Texas, that's Harris County, asking if he can show the film to his entire staff because they are preparing for mass vigilante challenges on Election Day. And so he's using it to train his staff, and now Cook County, several elections supervisors. I don't want to make it sound like it's some kind of dry educational film. They just want to be able to get the attention of their staff.
Brilliant film. I mean, it's a drama as much as a documentary. It's brilliantly made. I mean, you've got great production values. You've got, actual Hollywood stars,
Rosario Dawson is narrating. You can't do better. But the thing is that, yes, they're expecting these mass challenges in Texas, Arizona, Wisconsin, Iowa, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, and I think Alabama. I'll have to check we know that Bloomberg has reported that it's now spread to 10 states, but I think our count is getting up to 15. We don't know by Election Day because while only Georgia is the testing ground for this law that says you can, challenge an unlimited number of voters. What these people are doing is they're simply filling out thousands of single sheets. And that's what I'm seeing now in Texas, Arizona, Wisconsin. And by the way, people, please, there are vigilantes out there. It's not just a joke and not just some nutcase in a cowboy hat and pearl-handled guns.
Right.
They can challenge you. Please bring your utility bill, photo ID, something with your current address. And if you're in places like Wisconsin, there's same-day registration. They may not tell you that. They may say, okay, you've been challenged. Say, okay, let me re-register right now. It's down to the wire in Wisconsin, and we know that in the film we talk about the billionaire Bradley family, the new Kochs funding this purge and attack on voters. They are based in Milwaukee, and they're using their powers in Milwaukee to try to knock off voters there too, black voters and student voters in Madison.
Amazing stuff. GregPalast.com, VigilanteMovie.com. Vigilante is the new film, and you can watch it for free today and tomorrow. So check it out. Greg, thanks a lot for dropping by, and thanks so much for making this brilliant movie.
You're very welcome, Tom.
Yeah, Greg Palast, the great Greg Palast. We will be back. It's coming up on 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And share that with your friends, by the way. Pass it around as far and wide as you possibly can. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here. Julie in Posen, Michigan. Hey, Julie, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I have a question for you. But first I want to say that I saw this kid in the gas station the other day, and he had a hoodie sweatshirt on. And I forget the exact words, but it was something like squash white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And it was a picture of an angel with a pitchfork down, pinning the heads to the ground of all these white supremacist GOP leaders.
Whoa. That's pretty cool.
I thought it was great. It gave me hope.
Yeah, there you go, Julie.
Anyway, I have a question. This windfall profits tax you keep talking about, is this something that Biden can do without GOP support?
No, it requires Congress. Well, arguably he could do it. I don't know if he's run out of reconciliation. There's this weird thing called reconciliation where you can get a bill through the Senate with a majority and it can't be filibustered, but it has to meet certain criteria. One of them is that it has to have to do with taxing and spending, and I think this would qualify for that. But the other is you can only do it a certain number of times a year. And so, they may have run out of, they may have to wait until next year, in which case if the Republicans take the House or Senate, it ain't going to happen. But changing tax law is not something the president can do. It's something only Congress can do. It's Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution.
Okay, I was wondering how everybody else got away with doing it, but I guess it was a different time back then.
Again, I have to look this up. My recollection is it was Jerry Ford who got that windfall profits tax through in the 70s. Yeah. But back then there was a broader
They used to get along back then a little better. It wasn't as crazy as it is now.
Well, also you had a Republican president, and he was getting whacked by the inflation and by the greed of the oil companies, and so he did something about it. So.
Right, yeah.
Julie, thanks for the call. It's great to hear from you. It was a great question. Michael in Central Mexico. Hey, Michael. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
1 second here, Tom. Let me try to turn off my... There we go. Got the speaker turned off. A question for you, a quick question. Somebody was talking a few minutes ago about the inflation rate, and I got in... I'm always on the YouTube, not YouTube, Yahoo news and posting and getting comments back and stuff. And somebody was, and I mentioned, I corrected him, I thought, when I said that I'm old enough to remember when Jimmy Carter was in office, and it was a terrible inflation period back then. I think it was up in the 20s. And I mentioned that because the guy said, well, this is the worst inflation in 100 years. And I'm thinking,
no, it's not.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, yeah. I had a home mortgage that was 13 or 16%. It was just insane back in the late, actually, I think that was 81. We bought that house in Georgia. So.
Well, I remember that. And I mean, I also suffered the high-end mortgage rates. And, of course, we are refinancing as the rates went down. But
right.
But my question is, he seemed to think that the inflation rate is being computed differently today versus what it was being back in the late 1970s. He says because house prices and rent are no longer included where they were included back then. I don't know.
There are different measures of inflation, Michael, and I honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. I know that some of them, core inflation, core CPI versus consumer CPI, there's a bunch of different, inflation indexes that the federal government uses. And I don't know if they've pulled housing out of it or not. They shouldn't have, in my opinion, but I just don't know. Michael, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. If you believe that someone is a billionaire without seeing their taxes, if you believe someone is a genius if they hide their college grades, if you believe someone is a great businessman if they bankrupted casinos, if you believe somebody is an irresistible ladies' man if they have to pay for sex or even accused of rape, if you believe somebody is a philanthropist, if their charity got shut down for fraud and their children had to go through mandatory training about how not to commit fraud with philanthropies, if you believe someone is a patriot, if they got out of the draft during a time of war by submitting phony, dodgy x-rays showing bone spurs, if you believe someone is a Christian who doesn't go to church and doesn't know what 2 Thessalonians is, if you believe someone is an innocent man if they refuse to testify, well, you're not just gullible, you're a Trump supporter. I have a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. There's a new Senate report out about the barbaric consequences, their phrase, of Republican abortion bans. Elizabeth Warren and several other members of the United States Senate or other Democratic lawmakers released this report today, I believe, and perhaps yesterday afternoon. They conducted interviews with representatives from the American Medical Association, Physicians for Reproductive Health, the National Nurses United Union, the American Pharmacists Association, and the American Hospital Association over the last 2 months, basically saying what has been the impact in your experience of these abortion bans that are happening all over the country. And Tammy Duckworth, Tammy Duckworth, the Democratic Senator from Illinois, Tina Smith, the Democratic Senator from Minnesota, and Mazie Hirono, the Democratic Senator from Hawaii, along with Senator Warren, just released this report. And it is mind-boggling. For example, in New Mexico, the abortion clinics are so full that they're having to periodically stop taking new appointments. They're being overwhelmed with people coming from Texas. One of the PRH, which is the Physicians for Reproductive Health, they said that this has led to a 24% increase in maternal mortality overall, women dying in childbirth or pregnancy, in a country that already has the highest maternal mortality rate among all wealthy nations. You look at all 34 OECD countries, we have the highest rate of maternal deaths of mothers dying during pregnancy in the developed world. And this is increasing it by 24%. The APHA noted that methotrexate, this drug that my brother Stan used to take he had terrible arthritis. My brother who passed away last year, he used to take methotrexate, and it's also used to induce abortions. It's kind of a chemotherapy drug. It's used for chemotherapy, but it's mostly used for rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Crohn's disease, and conditions like that. This is from the American Pharmacists Association, APHA. This is a quote. In many states such as Alabama, Arkansas, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Montana, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia, methotrexate is specifically mentioned in state laws and regulations related to abortion. And due to the lack of guidance in interpreting laws in these states, they say pharmacists are unsure of their liability that they might face in dispensing methotrexate despite it being used for rheumatoid arthritis. So in other words, patients are not getting the quality of life or even life-saving pharmaceuticals that they need, because those pharmaceuticals, in this case methotrexate, can also be used as an abortifacient, which is nuts. They note at least 2 patients with cancer in Ohio were prevented from getting their chemotherapy because they were pregnant and it might cause an abortion. They had cancer. They were required to terminate their pregnancies before they could get treatment, but it was illegal in Ohio to terminate a pregnancy. So what do you do? Continue having cancer and let it get worse and worse while you're going through your pregnancy and then die? I mean, this is apparently the plan of the, Mike DeWine and the J.D. Vance and the Republicans in Ohio. The AMA said, and I quote, this is the American Medical Association, access to legal reproductive care will be limited to those who have sufficient resources, circumstances, and financial means, thereby exacerbating health inequalities by placing the heaviest burdens on patients from Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, low-income, rural, and other historically disadvantaged communities that already face numerous structural and systemic barriers to accessing health care. This is a flaming disaster. I mean, this is a crisis brought to our country by the Republican Party and Sam Alito and his 5 buddies, 5 right-wing buddies on the U.S. Supreme Court, imposing their religious ideology on the rest of the nation. And that's exactly what it is. It's nothing more or less than that. This is fundamentalist Christianity and Catholicism. I was going to say maybe arguably also there are other, I believe that there are sects in Islam that proscribe abortion. But frankly, they don't have any power in our Congress right now. And so this is really all about this fundamentalist form of Christianity that believes that life starts at the moment of conception, of the fertilization of an egg. And that's a religious doctrine. It's not a medical or health doctrine. We will be back with your calls on the other side of this break. It is 27 minutes past the hour here on the place where smart people get their news.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Inflation, voting, what are you hearing in your community? Are you hearing about votes being suppressed, people being thrown off the rolls? Give us a call.
Today from Truth in Our Times by David E. McCraw, Deputy General Counsel of the New York Times, the #2 lawyer for the New York Times. This is in Chapter 1, titled Election Day. It opens with a tweet from Donald Trump. The failing New York Times has been wrong about me from the very beginning. Sadly, I would lose the primaries. Said I would lose the primaries on the general election. Fake news. November 8, 2016. At 10 p.m., I made one last circuit of the newsroom. Our CEO, Mark Thompson, stood near the political desk, looking on with his wife and a small group of others connected somehow to the Times. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan remained in doubt, but the reality was sinking in. Donald Trump was on the verge of winning the American presidency. I'd been in newsrooms on election nights before. I know how it's supposed to be. The only thing that ever mattered was the horse race, think Gore-Bush, or the historic moment, think Obama-McCain. There was no investment in which candidate was winning. He or she was destined to disappoint in the long run. And the dominant emotion was a certain not quite cynical detachment amid the electric buzz of the vote count and projections and the anticipation of relief that the endless push of the campaign was finally over. Sure, you couldn't ignore the victories or the big picture moments, and the day after stories would be celebratory in their way, duly restrained, but with a nod to victory itself. Not unlike the next day account of a Super Bowl game or Game 7 of the World Series. Capture the triumph for a night or relish the race too close to call. Leave the dancing and crying for others, for the believers. But this night was like no other election night. There had been an investment, not just journalistic, but spiritual. Donald Trump had campaigned not just against Hillary Clinton, but also against the New York Times and the American press, the mainstream American press. And his astonishing rise to the top of the Republican Party had been built on his near daily attacks on facts, on the very idea that facts matter. For journalists who approach truth like a secular religion and who have seen 1,000 times how a single true story could gut the political career of a lying politician, it had been a year of faith-shaking disbelief. A line had not just been crossed, but obliterated. The shock was palpable as the numbers came in, laced for some with the fading hope for a different outcome among people who generally wanted nothing more than a story worth telling. And there was still a paper to put out, a reckoning to account for. It was too much on an already long night. I slipped away. At the elevators, I ran into Sue Craig and a guy who was obviously not from the Times. Sue had broken one of the biggest stories of the campaign. She was the one who went to her mailbox one day in September and found pages from Donald Trump's tax returns in an envelope. She introduced me to her acquaintance. He had once worked for Trump. I didn't ask why he was there. Like me, Sue had decided to get away. "It's too weird here," she said. We all got on the elevator. Sue, who had written a devastating story about Trump, me, whose letter to Trump's lawyers had lit up the internet for a week in October, and one of Trump's guys. We rode in silence, a strange tableau on the strangest night of the year. 14 hours earlier, as I came into the building, the Times security guard had called me over. They wanted to make sure I knew about the plans for the next morning. In the quirky ways that things happen at the Times, I had become the lawyer to see for all the things that security guys encountered, from the intruder who pilfered women's shoes to the anonymous letter weaponized with razor blades. The Times was printing thousands of extra newspapers, and tables were going to be set up outside for all the people who would be showing up to buy the New York Times for posterity's sake. The headline, I later learned, was going to read, "Madam President." We had been caught flat-footed 8 years earlier when Barack Obama had made history. By the time I arrived for work early in the morning of the 2008 election, the line was already starting to snake down the sidewalk. Soon there were hundreds of Obama supporters who thought, and why wouldn't they, that the place to buy a copy of the New York Times was surely at the New York Times. Lots of things happen at the Times building. Selling newspapers is not one of them. Employees were pressed into emergency duty to cart bundles of newspapers from the Times printing plant in Queens, and the long lines outside the building stretched on into the afternoon. But it was Obama's victory in 2012 that was on my mind this morning. I vote in a neighborhood that is predominantly black and middle class. In 2012, following a drumbeat of stories about how Republicans hoped to suppress voter turnout, I walked into my polling place at a local school 8 minutes after it opened. The line already extended back to the schoolhouse door. "Did y'all sleep here?" a guy wanted to know as he stepped into the foyer. On this morning in 2016, I had arrived before dawn. I was the only one in line at my precinct's table. That all seemed like a strangely distant memory as midnight approached. I had made my escape from the building with Sue and the Trump guy. At home, I sat alone in the glow of the TV screens as the states that mattered fell into place for the Republicans. I turned it off. Donald Trump was about to become president of the United States. The next morning, in a light drizzle on a gray November day, the newspaper sales tables were set up outside the building as planned. No one stopped. The vendors sat idly amid the stacks. There was no Madam President front page. Instead, the headline read, "Trump triumphs," and the first two paragraphs of the lead story talked about how the vote threatened convulsions throughout the country and made an early mention of those who had watched with alarm the rise of Trump. Nearly half the country had voted for the man. I had just spent a weekend in October back in rural Illinois, in my hometown, and for a moment I allowed myself to see the coverage through the eyes of the rest of America, where, at least for this one night, his victory represented a certain kind of hope that change was going to come at last. Truth in Our Times by David McCraw. This recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Normally, when I go on the air, I've done literally hours of show prep, and any topic I'm going to talk about, I have, great stacks of stuff printed out. Whoops, complete with Kleenexes, and what's going on and what I'm going to talk about, and all that kind of stuff. But somebody called and we started talking about the windfall profits tax, and I attributed it variously to Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter, and Jerry Ford. But Sean actually looked it up. And thank you, Sean, while I was ranting. And it was Jimmy Carter. It was the windfall profits tax of 1980. So I need to do a little more research, find out how long it lasted, what it did, how it worked. But just as a starting point, credit where credit is due, both to Jimmy Carter and to my producer, Sean. So picking up your phone calls here, Silvio in Massapequa, New York. Hey, Silvio, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM.
Well, actually, two things I want to mention. One, I was talking to my wife, and I was saying that as a teacher, a retired teacher, in some states now, if you teach about the abuses of slavery, or you read a book about a girl having two mothers, or if you discuss climate change, you could be fired, and in some states arrested.
And sued.
Evidently,
down in Florida, there's a teacher down in Florida who just had a gay pride sticker, a flag sticker in their classroom, and they're being actually sued by a parent for thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah, but the insane part is that you can strap on a .357 Magnum and walk into a classroom as a teacher, and the Republicans seem to be in favor of that.
Yeah, well, they like that, actually, yes.
Yeah, and one more thing. I just want to call out that idiot congressman I have, Andrew Garbarino, received his newsletter, nothing, again, about abortion, nothing about climate change, nothing about cutting Social Security or Medicare. It seems that any issue that the Republicans favor, which he thinks may may hurt him, he ignores, which is evidently, I'm finding out that's one of the Republican methods of getting elected.
He is a Republican, I'm assuming?
Oh,
yeah.
A real moron and a moron of a Republican to boot.
Okay.
That's possible.
The most common variety of the species. I get it. Okay,
and,
Sylvia.
Jackie Gordon, they said on Newsday, that's who's running against him. She's been gaining.
Good.
Oh, I don't know. I got my fingers crossed, but this is a very heavily Republican. Long Island, as you know, has been very, very much Republican for many years.
Yeah. Well, now they're going after our votes. I mean, they lied to us for years and years about trickle down and all this kind of stuff. And now that we've figured out the con, and they always said, oh yeah, we're just trying to placate the right wing, the religious right, by saying that we're going to end abortion rights. Well, now it's all out in the open. Their trickle-down lie was a scam. Their protestations about, we're really moderate when it comes to abortion, that was a lie. And
yeah, that's the line they use, moderation.
Right. Yeah. And these
even the guy running for governor, Zeldin. Said,
he's a nut job.
In New York, we won't change the abortion laws, even though he's favored.
No, he's a Trump humper. I mean, what do you expect? So, anyhow, Silvio, I need to move along. Thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for the report from New York State. James in Seattle. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I'm just suggesting that the Democratic Party end all subsidies for private enterprises like private schools.
I'm okay with that. I think we should also stop giving $600 billion a year to the fossil fuel industry.
Exactly. And Medicare is a 20% whole. That's a subsidy to the private enterprises.
It is.
And Biden needs to go on TV today or tomorrow and say to all the small business people, we're going to get the homeless people off your back. And we're going to do it immediately. He doesn't have to do it. He just has to say that he's going to do it. And then he could use the road funds and the Army Corps of Engineers to build these asylums that Reagan defunded 100%. That they could go and self-commit.
Yeah.
He needs to have that done as soon and quickly as possible to get the whole thing. And the reason Reagan, made these people homeless is because the cities are the strongholds of the Democratic Party, and he knew that they would all go there because the resources are there.
Well, perhaps. I mean, I actually read a history of this yesterday afternoon because I was going to write an op-ed about it. And the one I read, the article that I read, it was a fairly in-depth history of the time, was written by Daniel Patrick Moynihan back in the maybe the 80s. And Moynihan said, and he was there, He said that in 1961, they discovered and the FDA approved a drug that was the first drug that actually could sedate or deal with schizophrenia and severe bipolar disorder in such a way that people could be functional in society, that they didn't have to be institutionalized. They didn't have to be in lockup, basically. They, it didn't just turn them into drooling, whatever. It actually made them more normal. And so this then caused John Kennedy to propose legislation that would expand mental health clinics across the United States that could pass out this drug and thus deinstitutionalize people, from mental institutions. At that point in time, we had tens of thousands of people. My recollection is it was over 57,000 people who were in mental institutions in lockdown that would be eligible to use this drug. And so Kennedy tried to propose this. It got lost in his assassination and then LBJ's Great Society. Jimmy Carter picked this back up and got legislation passed, or got I believe it was legislation, it might have been an executive order, to build, as I recall, 2,000 of these mental health clinics all around the United States. By 1981, when Ronald Reagan came into office, a little over 100, my recollection, I only read the article once and it was yesterday afternoon, so forgive me if my numbers are wrong. You can probably track this down. But my recollection is it was 186 of these clinics had been built at that point in time out of the 10,000 that they wanted to build, and or the 2,000, excuse me. And Reagan just pulled the plug on the program, and that was the end of that. So we got the worst of both worlds. We got the deinstitutionalization without the clinics that would have made the drugs available for those people who were now deinstitutionalized. And the result of that was, this just flood of people, severely mentally ill people, onto the streets of America throughout the 1980s. And that's, those of us old enough to remember know that, we just basically did not have homeless people in the United States in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But, starting in the 80s, it became a thing. And you could track that back to that Reagan blowing up that policy that Carter had put into place. It's an amazing story.
And Reagan got a twofer because people believe wrongly that homelessness is a sign of high crime.
Right.
And then all the Republicans have to do is jimmy up the murder rate somehow. And that
they've just been using, they've been cherry picking numbers. I mean, it turns out that the highest murder rates are in Republican-controlled cities and Republican-controlled states. It's just, it's nuts, the stuff that we're getting on it. If you look at per capita murder rates, so
the city of Seattle has over 1 million people, and we have 60 murders on average a year. That's 1% of 1%, and about half of that. It's not a high murder rate, right. But when people, when it gets jimmied up for one reason or another, people believe they're afraid to come out of their houses because they think the homeless are part of that. It's a perception problem. It's not a reality problem.
Yeah. Well, and we have this very human tragedy of homelessness in the United States too that we have to deal with. James, thank you for the call. Jim in Valley Center, California. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just want to pick up on your last call. That was my reason for calling too. I'm a strong Democrat bullet voter, always wore a mask, got all the vaccines. Now I have 5, but I've really changed on the homeless. Here's why. Can you imagine, you said this last week and it really got me going. We're allowing people to defecate and urinate on the street and live on the street for an extended period of times. What does that do to the health? Tuberculosis, you name it.
Oh, it's a disaster.
Really
it's an absolute disaster. Right. And those cities that are still tolerating this, that are still putting up with this, and not offering an alternative, are in a crisis right now. I live in one of those cities.
As do I, but it's not nearly as bad in San Diego as it is up in LA where I used to live.
Yeah.
But here's what I think would be a solution. You hit it right on the head in the previous caller about the Reagan causing this. I remember I'm 72 years old. I rarely, if ever, saw a homeless person when I was a kid or up until the 80s.
Oh, in 1968, I hitchhiked from Lansing, Michigan down to San Antonio, from San Antonio to San Francisco, lived there for a couple of months, hitchhiked back to Michigan, stayed in a whole bunch of little towns all across the country and, visiting. Never saw any, homelessness was not a thing in 68. Back to you, Jim.
Exactly. Yes, no, you're 100% right, and that's what gets me fired up. But here's what I think. Remember the boat people we had coming from Vietnam, and we put that huge center in Camp Pendleton so that the Vietnamese coming over could make a transition from Vietnam to America, or the Cubans. We had that huge relocation in Florida, and in Los Angeles. I really think we should reconsider doing that. I think that we need, as a society, to come to the grips that this is so unhelpful, so dangerous, and that's one thing I didn't agree. There is a lot of crime in homeless areas, and not to say that I think is incorrect. But I think we have to start saying we need to build a structure. Just think of the Quonset huts, the Marine barracks. You could put up 20 Marine barracks.
After World War II, that's where my wife's father and mother lived in one of those Quonset huts off the campus of Michigan State University while he went to law school, paid for by the federal government, by the way, with the GI Bill, back in 1948, I guess it would have been. And 47, 48, 49 in that era. And this is, I'm with you, Jim. We need a national mobilization of some sort to deal with this, and we need to make it, basically unacceptable to have homelessness in these towns. And I'm not talking about going after the homeless people and saying you're unacceptable. I'm talking about going after the politicians and saying, how dare you, not provide some services or some alternative or do something about this situation. Jim, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back with your calls after this. It's Talk Media for the sane among us. And welcome back. Daniel in Bishop, California. Hey, Daniel, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Well, thanks very much for having me on.
Sure.
We've recently heard of some Latino voters leaning Republican. The contemporary Republican brand is based on grievance and the fear of racial and religious, quote, replacement, unquote. This GOP can never do anything that appears to favor brown-skinned immigrants if they want to maintain their base. So Latinos especially need to consider that in voting for family-sounding Republican talking points, that they are also throwing 600,000 dreamers under the bus, Tom.
Yeah, I know about that. It's unfortunate, and the Supreme Court, is going to get in on this too. Daniel, the pitch, what I understand the main sales pitch is, and this is happening in Spanish language radio across the United States, is those black welfare queens, to revive Reagan's term, want to take your tax dollars, your hardworking tax dollars, and quack, 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 and Republicans are still using race as a thing to cleave people from each other, but instead of just cleaving white people from black people, now they're cleaving Hispanic people from black people, and this is just vile. I don't have a better word to describe it than that, but that's what's going on. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thanks again. Yeah, I'm just saying that the Republicans can never, in their current incarnation, can never do anything that appears to favor a brown-skinned person, a Latino.
Well, what they're saying to them is, you're white enough that you're okay with us. I mean, that's basically their message. I mean, it's like I said, it's just evil. Daniel, thank you. Ace in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Hey, Ace, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for supporting American values and principles, reminding people what we're about, supposedly. I'm a North Carolina retiree, and there was a info session last week with the state treasurer online. And he announced that people are going to be automatically enrolled in the Humana Medicare Advantage plan unless they state otherwise. Although 85% of North Carolina state and local employees are currently on the Advantage plan. And there's a 19-day enrollment period that ended last week. And it's like he was just gushing about how great this plan was and how he's looking forward to it next year when he retires and getting on the plan. And it really seemed like he was just a shill for the Humana Advantage.
Well, if he's a Republican member, if he's a Republican politician, odds are, big insurance is pouring money into his campaigns. I mean, I don't know specifically. I'm saying odds are, but
yes. But he's a state treasurer, and he's responsible for all the retirees. And the retirement plan is great. I mean, they've done a great job in managing it. But the medical care now, they're just moving people out of Medicare into the Medicare Advantage, and people are just not getting a clue.
Yeah, and they won't have a clue until they get seriously ill, and then suddenly discover that they're owing $5, $10, $15, $20, $50,000 that their insurance company isn't paying. Or if they try to do something out of network, or if they get sick out of state or whatever. Ace, thank you. Thanks for the heads up. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a moment. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Are you feeling sad and depressed? Are you anxious, worried about the future, feeling isolated and alone? You might be suffering from capitalism. Symptoms include homelessness, unemployment, poverty, hunger, feelings of powerlessness, fear, listlessness, disenfranchisement, isolation, loss of identity, self-loathing, feelings of guilt, loss of free speech, incarceration, fines, suicidal thoughts, death, or revolution. Now, that's kind of the funny one, but the serious thing is that capitalism, unregulated capitalism, unrestrained, laissez-faire, neoliberal capitalism, no income tax capitalism, no regulation capitalism, does produce this kind of a crisis. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to, and thank goodness we are moving in the right direction, I think, back toward regulated capitalism like Franklin Roosevelt gave us, rather than the unregulated neoliberal capitalism of the Trump years. I got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. Tag you're it. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Peter in Clinton, New York. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Oh, I was just considering, you're talking about the oil companies being nationalized, but what about the power companies? Because in New York, of course, ours is owned by the Brits.
Really?
National Grid. And the Brits are in a crisis, of course, of power, big time. And so I'm saying to myself, well, is that going to end up on my bill?
Yeah, probably. I mean, this is the thing. Yeah. If your power company, monopolies, natural monopolies, electricity, water, sewage, roads, highways, police, fire, schools, these are all natural monopolies. These are all things where competition just doesn't work. You can't, you can't go out and say, hey, I want a different water company. I think I'll dig up my lawn and run a different pipe in, right? You can't say, hey, the school down the street is nice, but, I want to do. Yeah, I mean, arguably you could, but it's probably the most portable of all of them. But still, natural monopolies should be run by the state. And by state, I mean that generically, by cities, states, counties, the federal government, whatever is appropriate, under the supervision of elected officials who are answerable to the electorate. It's just that simple.
You would think, yeah.
Yeah, they should be. And half the utilities, half the electric utilities in the United States are still publicly owned, but half of them aren't. Half of them are owned by for-profit entities or, groups like this, apparently in New York, owned by the Brits.
Well, there's something else going on that I keep hearing about, and that is, of course, crypto using so much power. In New York, there are 3 servers down near Lake Seneca that use as much power as the rest of the state combined.
Just to mine crypto.
They just use it for crypto. And in Texas this summer, a third of Texas power goes to crypto. And they shut down some of the crypto, but well, it's true.
Maybe in a community or a county, a third of it, but a third of the statewide power?
Yeah, the numbers are online here and there, but I think it's 97 gigawatts versus 23 used for crypto. And this summer, of course, they had to shut them down because they had crisis of power due to air conditioning. Right. But the state had to reimburse the crypto guys.
Amazing. And all they're doing basically is they're converting electricity into something that is, arguably nothing. Money. It's. I believe it's
literally not producing anything.
I know. And
I also in New York they're getting heavy discounts on power too on a kilowatt basis.
Yeah, but because they're buying in bulk, I get it. Peter, I got to run, but thank you. Thanks for raising that important issue. Rob in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I got a question at the end of this about the vote challenges, but I originally called about just the hidden cost of inflation, which is everything being downsized in your grocery stores especially.
Right.
I mean, right down to Kleenex boxes. We pulled out a Kleenex box, bought some, and put them in one of those covers, and it's smaller now. Everything's just shrinking down, and the price is going up on everything.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was always worried about, because I grew up in Michigan to about 1980. My dad had a gas station, and diesel was always cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For good reason. Truckers use that, so, the save cost of delivery. Now, everywhere out here, I'm in Arizona now, it's higher.
Yeah, I'm hearing that from all over the country. And apparently it has to do with refinery capacity.
Right. And I don't know if the truckers buy it from the same, commercial stores that I see it, or if they have a different pump. But that raises prices again on everything, because everything in the stores is being shipped using those, that fuel.
Yeah.
So it's just another hidden cost that's being passed on to us.
Yeah.
And the one comment I had was, you had a caller and then I missed it because I'm working from home, and he said something about the vote challenges. Where are they getting those lists from?
They're getting them from an organization, at least according to Greg Palast, from an organization called True the Vote out of Texas, which, I'll let you look it up. Rob, thanks for the call. By the way, tonight, during prime time, President Biden is going to give a speech about the crisis of democracy in America. I hope the networks all carry it. Whether they do or they don't, you're going to want to watch it. So check that out. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, now more than ever. So get out there, vote, and spread the good word. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.